Dream logic is the unconscious on a bullet train. Wishes, fears, and preoccupations that would in waking life be compartmentalized as hypotheticals firmly cemented in the mind, instead become the immediate impetus for the construction of entire settings and narratives of their own, the mind becoming an open, worldly environment rather than an internalized stage. For example, I have a dream where I'm traveling in an airport alone. I'm boarding my flight, but have none of my own belongings, but rather my mother's. Prompted to show my ticket, I'm searching her phone for some ticket barcode that would permit my entry. In a mere instant, while shuffling through apps, I worry about how bored I'll be on the flight with no entertainment, no books, music, or friendly company. However, this worry coincided with my being completely thrown into the scenery of the imagined future plane ride, sitting alone and anticipatorily wandering the cabin with my eyes. I lose continuity and contact with my current dream task of finding my ticket and become instantly tossed into a setting and narrative constructed instantly by my unconscious in order to creatively and progressively play out my worry and preoccupation on a narrative level, complete with the mental architecture necessary to continue as if things were normal, as if I hadn't just jumped between settings, moods, and concerns. This is how dream logic works. The divide between thought as content versus thought as form and structure becomes blurred, if not eradicated. The fetters of waking, conscious thought, such as the compartmentalization of thought done in everyday life to deal with hypotheticals, plans, and new information, are removed in such a way that the dreaming mind seamlessly alters plot, setting, mood, tone, etc., to fit the playing out of any thought of any kind. Thus, the tendency for dreams to often present uncomfortably unfettered access to our desires, fears, anxieties, and pains. This helps one understand James Joyce's Finnegans Wake because it helps make sense of the lack of quotation marks, standard punctuation in places it would and wouldn't be expected, the flurries of run-on sentences, inconsistent genre, blurring of proper names and other parts of speech in single words and phrases, etc. All of these are ways of revealing the unfettered logic of the dream. Through this lack of immediate clarity, it's like driving one's car alone for the first time as a newly licensed driver. One is faced with the precariousness of the whole thing, the uncertainty of the whole game, and the inability to eliminate the inevitability of extraneous factors, constantly threatening one's sense of safety. Additionally, one's ethical responsibilities, instilled in one since birth and carefully coddled up till now, are laid bare against the constructed rules of the road. If one wanted to, one could swerve off the road if one pleased, or someone else could do the same. Such a realization is that of the contingency and frailty of history and society. The same realization is procured for the reader of Finnegans Wake. Through deconstructing and dismantling the English language, and along with it, history, society, ethics, the family, individuality, and more, the radical contingency of the world and the imminence of the future in the past as present and present as anticipation is laid bare. Therefore, Joyce's radical undermining of linguistic convention in Finnegans Wake serves as a wake-up call. It is both an informative reminder that Finnegans do in fact wake, as well as a declarative command upon the reader. Finnegans, wake! Curiously, there's a tension here between waking and sleeping as ethical categories. Waking has historically been analogized to the enlightened mind, free of the dark of sleep, as in Plato's allegory of the cave, and facing the blinding light of eternal, universal, and absolutely immutable truth. Sleep, on the other hand, is equated with a passive, unreflective, and gullible mind, unequipped or unprepared to see the light of truth, let alone make even the first steps towards such a goal. However, Joyce doubtless seeks a sort of Derridean deconstruction of this logocentric privileging of waking. For Jacques Derrida, symbolic systems, of which language and society writ large are both exemplary cases, depend upon binaries in which one term is privileged above the other, hierarchized in such a way that the lower term uses its inferior position to articulate, confirm, and recognize the privileged term, at the expense of having its own meaning and identity deferred. Take, for example, the male-female binary. Often cited by feminist theorists, this binary is rife with privileging and inequality. Take the male term. It represents agency, activity, duty, command, authority, height, power, respect, and, most importantly, the position of the subject. Think all men are created equal in the U.S. Constitution, or nature hath made men so equal in the faculties of body and mind, from Hobbes's Leviathan. Compare this to the female term. It represents submission, passivity, obedience, modesty, nurturing, gentleness, and the position of object, i.e., the object of patriarchal approval or the object of male ownership, either by their father, husband, or brother, as in the Old Testament or in the Quran. We can immediately see the radical disparity between these terms. Female identity is contingent upon being a component member of a male economy of desires and means, such that, for example, being a woman entails acquiescing to male standards of dress in the workplace, as well as adopting stereotyped and restrictive quote-unquote female standards of etiquette. To be a woman is to have one's agency, authority, power, respect, indeed one's identity itself, deferred in order that women may serve the legitimation of these qualities in men. This uneven binary therefore systematically disparages one term in order to give the illusion of solidity, universality, and identity in the other. For Derrida, all science's meaning is at heart deferred. It's just that we have the illusion of only one, that being the lesser or the underprivileged term, being deferred in order to make the coherence of the system tolerable, navigable, and livable. If we probe deep enough, we will find that, in fact, there is no unmediated, pure truth to act as the ground of our symbolic schemes, and no sign whose identity is absolute, total, or undeferred. We are so irrevocably tied to the world not as the world, but as our world, that it would be, for Derrida, a completely incoherent and pointless project to try to seek such a ground. The world would no longer be the kind of thing lived in or habitable or acceptable to the kinds of beings we are. Therefore, all symbolic systems are at heart dependent upon this state of groundlessness, or Ungrund, as Heidegger would put it, incessantly deferring meaning to a further element of our symbolic system, giving the illusion of unquestionable coherence. This process of deference, termed différance by Derrida, makes sense of the incessant need to act forward in history and make meaning out of the world through actions, as well as the proliferation and maintenance of symbolic schemes. Joyce comes on the scene as an exemplar, therefore, of Derrida's key practice of deconstruction, privileging the underprivileged term in a binary in order to upset the logocentric complacency of our standards and norms. Joyce, rather than seeing waking as an unquestionable goal of this Book of the Dark, waking is associated with a teleological, dogmatic, moralistic, and unartistic mindset bent on complacency, oppression, hate, and a subservience to presuppositions and fears. Joyce upsets the waking-sleeping binary by privileging the sleeping state as one of critical investigation, vitality, movement, immanence, zeal, and imagination. In a word, a dream. Rather than viewing sleep as a state of submission and laziness, replete with all the moralizing connotations these words bring with them, Joyce takes a markedly empathetic stance in Finnegans Wake, that we all fall, not only to the meeting of our expectations, hopes, and duties, but falling into sleep. Rather than viewing falling as a failure, falling is treated more descriptively and pragmatically, that is, as a simple fact of life, as well as redemptively, taking on a markedly positive and theological tone. In a properly Nietzschean sense, ecstasy, agency, and life can only be truly experienced through one's Untergehen, or going under. Only by staring one's radical immanence in the face, marred in all its uncertainties, taboos, and fears, can one be properly redeemed from the bonds of egoistic selfhood. from the modernist conception of individuality in which one is a mere mind or subject up against a world of objects. Paradoxically, it is by being inundated with one's self, journeying into it, through dreams that one can radically undermine the self and locate its holes. No better method is there for such a deconstruction of modernity in the subject than the dream logic of Finnegans Wake.